It is election night in America, and Northern Michigan's news leader has you covered as we learn who will represent us in D.C. and in Lansing. Results for the 2024 election are rolling in tonight, with polls across the continental 48 states now closed. Thank you for joining us and trusting us on our election night. I'm David Leiden. Right off the top at noon, it is Election Day here in America. It is a day where adjectives are thrown around to describe its importance, but it simply boils down to having the freedom to choose who you want to lead our country. We're taking a live look at voters doing so right now in Philadelphia. For months, Northern Michigan's election leader has been preparing you for today. Our team of reporters are spread throughout the state covering the races that will impact you. That includes the U.S. Senate race between Republican Mike Rogers and Democrat Elissa Slotkin. 9 and 10's Sheldon Krause is covering that race and joins us live in just a moment. And in the U.S. House, incumbent Republican John Moolenaar is being challenged by Democrat Michael Lynch to represent the 2nd Congressional District. Jody Meeson will have live details on that race. And live in Traverse City is Megan Huskins covering the race for the 103rd State House District in Benzie, Leelanau, and Grand Traverse counties. That race could change who has control of Lansing's lower chamber. And many Americans are heading to the polls nationwide, expressing the importance of their vote and the impact of today's decisions and the impact those decisions will have on our country's future. As early voting breaks records, the latest polling data shows a tight race between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in key battleground states. Christian Benavides is in Atlanta. Almost half of Michigan voters skipped the line by early voting. Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson says more than 3.2 million Michigan voters have already cast their ballot for the 2024 general election. That is nearly 45% of active registered voters. Benson said this morning the state will likely break turnout records. Let's dive into that data a little bit more. According to data from the Bureau of Elections, women represent 55% of the vote so far, compared to 45% of men. The vote total so far includes 12.5% of voters between 18 and 30 years old. Young voters represent more than 17% of the state's total early in-person vote. Michiganders over the age of 60 represent more than half of the votes cast so far, with 51.4%. Leaders in every state have extremely busy schedules today, working to ensure that this year's election is the most secure ever. That includes at the polling places. A ring of steel now surrounds the White House in Washington. Similar security measures are in place at both candidates' election night headquarters, plus platoons of tactical teams, drones, and counter-surveillance technology. It is an election week security posture that extends beyond the nation's capital. Today, dozens of National Guardsmen will deploy in at least a half dozen states, plus D.C., with hundreds more on standby. One big concern for law enforcement, ensuring those political battlegrounds don't become actual ones, as the Philadelphia District Attorney made clear on Monday. Outside of the presidential race, the U.S. Senate race here in Michigan is the one that will impact every Michigander, plus the balance of power in Washington. Republican Mike Rogers and Democrat Elissa Slotkin are expected to have a close race once all the votes are tallied. 9 and 10's Sheldon Krause is covering that race for us. He kicks off our live election 2024 coverage from Detroit. Sheldon, thank you. And in the U.S. House of Representatives, all 435 seats are being voted on across the country today. Republicans are fighting to keep their narrow majority, and the Michigan congressional races could play a big role in the balance of power in Washington. 9 and 10's Jody Meeson is following the 2nd congressional district race between incumbent Republican Congressman John Moolenaar and Democratic challenger Michael Lynch. Jody. And here in northern Michigan, the 103rd State House District could go back to Republicans as Lisa Trombley is challenging incumbent Democrat Betsy Coffia. 2 years ago, this seat helped swing the State House to a Democratic majority. 9 and 10's Megan Huskins has been following this race for the last couple of months. She joins us live with how the candidates are preparing for tonight. Megan, thank you, and stick with 9 and 10 News today and the rest of the week for comprehensive election and presidential 2024 coverage. Off air, head over to 9and10news.com for details on candidates, proposals, and voting resources. Just click on the Politics tab under News to stay prepared for this election day. No one will bring you more complete live coverage throughout the night than 9 and 10 News. Our team of reporters are spread throughout the state, covering the races impacting you.
We've been covering Michigan's historic voter turnout for weeks now. 9 and 10's Jatine Tinsley has a breakdown of how today's turnout is faring and if there are any issues in this year's elections.
The U.S. Senate race here in Michigan is one that everyone across the country is focused on. Republican Mike Rogers and Democrat Alyssa Slotkin are vying for the second Senate seat in our state. 9 and 10's Sheldon Krause will join us live in just a moment with the very latest on both campaigns.
And 9 and 10's Megan Huskins is live in Traverse City after talking to both of the candidates in the tightly contested 103rd District. This race could change who controls the state house.
And 9 and 10's Jody Meason has been working for months covering the Isabella County Road Patrol millage. If this millage does not pass, the county road patrol is gone. She'll have what the sheriff is saying ahead of tonight's results.
Now, members of Congress are also on the ballot in all 50 states.
And the balance of power in the House and the Senate could tip either way tonight. In 10 states, voters are weighing in on abortion access. Danya Backus reports from the battleground of Arizona. Also covers Mount Pleasant, Reed City, and Cadillac. Democrat Michael Lynch is trying to unseat incumbent Congressman John Molinar, who's been a Michigan congressman since 2014. Here's a look at where the vote totals stand in this race right now. And Congressman Molinar has opened up an 11,000 vote lead at this hour over his challenger. But again, these numbers very early and just 9% of the vote reported in this race. 9 and 10's Jody Meason keeping a close eye on this race. She's standing by in Mount Pleasant with the latest from both campaigns. Jody. Was a political earthquake that went through this country. Let's try to read the tea leaves a little bit now as we start to look into the numbers. Again, we're going with Associated Press projections tonight. We got some new projections just into our newsroom. Vice President Harris going to pick up a win in Colorado. Not a surprise there. Former President Trump picking up the state of Utah out west, as well as the state of Montana. So right now our electoral count is Trump 198, Harris 109, and it looks like a big gap right now. Don't forget, California is still out there. It's safe to say we know how that state is going to sway. So that narrows the gap a little bit, but at least in these, we'll call them relatively still early hours, Dr. Leder, what are you seeing right now in the Electoral College map as it sort of starts to come together? The other area there's been some questions about performance has been Georgia in the suburban areas, at least early right now. I'm just going to look at the percentage of the vote in right now in Georgia. 82% in Georgia. This state has not been called. The former president opening up a bit more of a sizable lead in the past hour in Georgia. That would be a state that would flip back to Republican hands if the former president were to grab that. Where does that fit into electoral math as we start to look at this? The other interesting note, and why I think there's a lot of attention being paid to the Senate right now, is if you have Republicans pick up control of the Senate, but you have Vice President Harris win the presidency, she's not necessarily going to get the cabinet that she wants, or she's going to have a very hard time come January getting her cabinet nominees through. We're going to touch on the Senate race really quick, but the North Carolina win for the Trump campaign, Dr. Leder, that is a big state that they needed to fall into their column. The math right now is very much there for the former president. You do have some updated results to roll through right now. Let's look at Michigan right now. The former president leading our state by 116,000 votes, so that margin is growing in the last half hour. The margin also growing in Pennsylvania. If we can bring that state up right now, that is a 200,000. We don't have that graphic right now, but we can tell you that is a 200,000 vote lead for the former president, and just across Lake Michigan, an 80,000 vote lead for the former president in Wisconsin, where they are reporting 66% of their vote, and in Pennsylvania they are reporting 76% of their vote. We do need to touch on the U.S. Senate. That is the other big race that we are watching right now. We are waiting for projections really in the two other states that Republicans felt they could pick up a seat. That's in Ohio and in Montana. A lot of votes still needing to come in Montana.